Welcome back to Memory Course. Today we are having an interview with an expert in the field of motion and memory, Professor Dr. Margaret Jackson from the University of Aberdeen. So I was an undergraduate student at the University of Aberdeen, where I graduated with my degree in psychology, and one of my favourite courses was on learning, memory and cognition. And I was actually taught here in Aberdeen by Professor Robert Logie, a key professor in the area of memory research. And I particularly enjoyed his working memory lectures. I thought they were really interesting and had a genuine interest in that when I was learning here. When I was a student here, the University of Aberdeen were running a lot of face recognition research. They have a strong history of face recognition research in Aberdeen, and for some extra money I helped participate in some face research experiments. I was on a computer and I had to pinpoint areas of a face, and I think that might have been used at some point in developing photo-fit faces. And at the time, as a student here, I had no idea that I would end up back here as a lecturer in the School of Psychology. And I also didn't realise that I would build my core research on memory and faces. So it all has come back together again. So I find working memory particularly interesting, and it's really important in social cognition because it helps us piece together information from moment to moment. So what someone's saying, what they're conveying to us through their feelings and emotions and behaviours. We need to track what people are doing from second to second in order to make sense of it. So for example, listening to me speak right now, you're using your working memory to remember what I just said and link it to what I'm currently saying. A few years ago I read a book about Clive Wearing. He's a musician, or was a musician, here in the UK, and he suffered a virus that destroyed many parts of his brain, and he lost most of his memory function. And in particular, what interests me, his wife wrote a book about him, and it's a fantastic book and it's really emotional as well. She explains what his life was like without the ability to use working memory. So he lives in a world that lasts between 7 and 30 seconds, and after that time, everything has been erased. He can't piece anything together. And his wife explains the fact that if he glances away, looks away for a moment, then all trace of what he's seen has vanished from his memory. So this is what interests me in particular about working memory. And the role of emotion in memory and social cognition, I think, is essential to consider because it's part and parcel of our life. We don't live in a neutral world. There's always some kind of emotion or value linked to how we think and how we behave. And so this is why I'm interested in looking at the influence of emotion on cognition and memory. So I'm interested in the role of emotion, but it's important to consider emotion in terms of a very broad definition. So emotion simply isn't just an expression in a face or how we feel, it's something bigger than that. It's how we assign a value to something, and it helps us make decisions. So it can also help us assess the intentions of other people according to what they are expressing. And emotion is really interesting because it's also shown to influence how we allocate our cognitive resources and our attentional resources, which are limited. And so we have to distribute these resources efficiently. A lot of the work I've done in the past 10 years has looked at the influence of emotional expression in a face on how well we can remember faces. And in particular, I focused on working memory. And the consistent finding in my work is that when we're asked to remember people in the short term, over a few seconds, we remember them much better when they have shown an angry expression than when they've shown, for example, a happy expression, neutral expression, or even fearful expression. And this indicates that there might be something particularly salient or valuable about remembering someone quite clearly if they're signalling threat through an angry expression, in the short term at least. Other work I've been involved in has shown that this isn't always the case, however. It can be linked to our own mood state and our own values at that time, emotional value. So one study we did looked at participants with major and melancholic depression, and those with severe depression showed better working memory for sad faces. And this indicates there's a link between our own personal motivations and what we prioritise in our short-term memory. But it's not as clear as that. When you turn to look at long-term memory research, other work shows that when we measure people's identification of faces over a longer time period, so after a few minutes, not seconds now, there's a happy benefit to our memory. And this may be important for remembering positive aspects of people if we're going to encounter them later on in time and we want to develop friendships or alliances. So it seems that the passage of time changes what we prioritise in our memory and our cognition. We prioritise threat in the short term, whereas we prioritise pro-social signals in the long term. And so both these emotions have different adaptations in different contexts, really. However, the picture's not that clear. Some of my more recent work is showing that there are different things that can modulate our working memory for faces. For example, if we apply a spatial context and we now have to remember where someone is, not just who they are, but where they were, we are now finding that happy faces are better remembered, or the location of happy faces are better remembered. So the angry benefit in working memory changes depending on the cognitive context. And a lot more work has to be done in this area to determine why, but it might be linked into approach and avoid tendencies. When you now have to navigate spatially your social world, we tend to prefer to approach happy pro-social individuals and tend to avoid threatening individuals. But yeah, more work needs to be done in this area. And finally, some other things might modulate working memory and long-term memory for faces, such as gaze direction. So this is another area I'm interested in, the link between where we're looking and the expression we're showing. There's a lot of other work that shows that how we perceive emotions in faces can change depending on where someone's looking. So the link between emotion and gaze is a particularly interesting one. So my current research is still linked to cognition and face processing, but I'm particularly interested in the role of the predictive brain. It's thought that we think and behave not in a responsive manner to things, but that we think proactively and predictively about what may happen based on our past experiences and what we've learned before. So I'm particularly interested in how we use predictions in social cognition, and in particular the role of emotion prediction. So our past experiences and what we have learned may lead us to predict a certain emotional response from someone in a certain situation, and what I'm really interested in is what happens when these predictions are violated. What happens when what we expect doesn't happen and maybe the opposite happens. This is called a prediction error, when what we expect to see doesn't match what actually happens. So in terms of emotion processing and social cognition, it's really interesting to think about how we adapt to violations of our emotional predictions, what happens when someone doesn't respond in the way that we expect, how do we adapt to that, and how do we then update our predictions when we encounter these people later in time. And I'm also interested in exploring the role of working memory in maintaining these predictions during a social interaction, and also the role of working and long-term memory in updating these predictions if we encounter a prediction error and we have to change our expectations of someone then. So I have some students in my lab working on emotion prediction and memory at the moment, But I'm really keen to build up a bigger project of work on this area in the future.